Welcome to Newcastle Family History Society podcast. The Newcastle Family History Society, located on Awabakal land in Newcastle, New South Wales, Australia, provides support for those interested in family history. In part 2 of our podcast on the first coal mines established in the shadow of Mount Sugarloaf, Benita Parker from the West Wallsend District Heritage Group guides us through West Wallsend's transformation from a forested hillside to a vibrant coal mining town, complete with its own railway and a thriving community. Benita explores the pioneering efforts that shaped the town, the labour strikes that marked its history, and the challenges that the community faced as it grew.
As early as 1883, there was interest in establishing a West Wallsend coal mining company. It was to be a company with a capital of £90,000, set up mainly by Scottish capitalists, with Dr. James R.M. Robertson as their Australian representative. The original directors of the West Wallsend Coal Company were Messrs. Stokes, Robertson and Withers of Sydney, and Messrs. Alexander Brown, James Fletcher and Thomas Brooks of Newcastle. The property was freehold and consisted of 2,972 acres. If you recall an earlier podcast, that was the amount of land purchased from the Taralba Trust. In January 1884, the new coal company had come into existence under the name of West Wallsend Coal Mining Company. It had already done much groundwork to establish itself as indicated in seeking to have the Railway Bill passed in 1883. Two companies, West Wallsend and Monk Wearmouth Coal Companies, commenced preparatory mining operations in 1885 to 1890. During this time, some 40 workers were employed on shaft sinking and foundation work for the start of the coal mines. They were housed in huts clustered around the two proposed mine sites. Over many months, boring operations with the diamond drill attained a depth of 721 feet, and several valuable seams of coal had been passed through at the West Wallsend site. The coal was of excellent quality and in abundance. A permanent shaft was sunk and the usual structures at the pit's mouth commenced. The main colliery building was constructed with the pit head being of steel, the first of its kind in the colony of New South Wales, while the poppet head reached a height of 71 feet from the ground. The properties being referred to adjoined the Wallsend and Minmi collieries and were within 2 miles of the new Northern Railway line from Sydney to Waratah. This meant that a link line could be built from the two proposed mines to the main Northern line. But the main north-south railway did not reach the coalfields in the West Wallsend area. A link line was an urgent necessity. For the purpose of getting their coal to the port, the company needed to construct 5 miles, or 8 kilometres, of private railway, which would branch off the Sydney-Newcastle line at Cockle Creek, a distance of 10 miles or about 16 kilometres from the shipping cranes on Bullock Island on the Hunter River at Newcastle. This needed a private railway to be constructed. Before a private railway could be constructed, an Act of Parliament had to be passed giving permission. In October 1883, well before any coal mines were commenced in West Wallsend, application was made to the New South Wales Government for leave to introduce a private bill. This bill would authorise Mr. R.B. Wallace and Dr. James R.M. Robertson, trustees of the West Wallsend Coal Company Limited and the Monkwearmouth Colliery Company of Australia, to construct and maintain a railway along with a branch line to land portion 124. This would connect the coal lands belonging to the company situated in the parish of Terralba, county of Northumberland, with the government's Sydney to Waratah railway line near Cockle Creek. Sometime later, a second amended bill reached Parliament on the 9th of June 1887. This bill changed the route of the line, making substantial cost savings. The amended Act was passed on the 13th of July 1887. The line was 5 miles and 72 chains in length from Monkwearmouth to Cockle Creek and was jointly owned by the two companies, West Wallsend Coal Company and Monkwearmouth Coal Company, sharing all the costs of maintenance and sidings. As this line crossed land owned by other mining companies and private landowners, arrangements were made to give access to the line and costs were agreed to. The estimated cost of the railway was over £16,000, and for its length it passed through land purchased for its construction by the company. The company hauled the coal wagons from the mine to Cockle Creek by their own engines, the remaining distance to Newcastle being done by the government at a cost of 1 shilling and 1 pence per tonne. When the West Wallsend Coal Company officially opened on the 4th of July 1888, the then directors were Messrs. Alexander Brown, Chairman, David Wilson, Thomas Brooks, H. Withers, E. Vickery, MLC. It was estimated that the property could yield 7,500 tonnes of coal per annum. The Monkwearmouth Coal Colliery also began producing in the area on March 1890 after 4 years of preparation. It later became known as Seam No. 1 Colliery in 1891-92. In a brief extract from the Memorandum of Agreement made on the 23rd day of July 1885 between Dr. James Robert Miller Robertson of Sydney in the colony of New South Wales, medical practitioner, representative of West Wallsend Coal Company Limited, and Mr. Robert Barclay Wallace of Newcastle, merchant and vendor, holder of the lands known as Terralba Estate. The agreement had been entered into between the vendors and the company and was witnessed and signed by Dr. Robertson and Mr. Wallace. From the 1880s until the 1930s, the impact of coal mining was at its strongest, as demonstrated by the development of collieries such as West Wallsend No. 1, Seam Numbers 1 and 2, Killingworth, Rhondda and Mount Sugarloaf. The first coal from the West Wallsend colliery was transported on the completed line on the 16th of May 1888, and the official opening occurred on the 4th of July 1888. A passenger and goods service followed soon after this. Branch line extensions were added to Seahampton, Fairley and Killingworth, where mines were developed. At Cockle Creek, there were 7 sets of sidings built to handle the output of all the collieries using the new private line. At the official opening, Mr. Thomas Evans, the colliery manager, gave a report to the gathered crowd. He had held similar positions in several extensive collieries in South Wales and was proud of the achievement to date in the new mine. Dr. Robertson was the colliery viewer, and under his supervision, the works in connection with the development of the mine had been carried out. Finally, the chairman, Mr. Alexander Brown, at the official opening had proposed the toast of "Prosperity to West Wallsend Coal Company Limited." In doing so, he compared the present situation of that colliery with that of the original Wallsend colliery some 20 years before, in 1868. At that time, the Wallsend colliery was surrounded by bush, as West Wallsend was on this occasion. But now, Wallsend colliery was surrounded by a busy and thriving township containing School of Arts and splendid business premises. This would be the future of West Wallsend, he felt certain. He congratulated the shareholders upon the splendid modern plant and appliances they possessed, for which credit needed to be given to Dr. Robertson, who had introduced them. The borehole seam in this colliery contained a very large number of bands. When the colliery was working, good progress was made with the drives and headings, and the output for 1888 was 7,645 tonnes. The company at this early stage had 90 men at work. However, troubles lay ahead. In 1892, a mine opened at Killingworth. It became Killingworth Colliery, with production starting in 1897. In 1905, the name changed to West Wallsend Killingworth Colliery, and again about 1915 it became Wallsend Extended Colliery. It ceased production for 4 years in December 1910 after an explosion, and was closed indefinitely in 1930, but was in operation again 1950 to 1956. Such was the life of many of these early mines. Seam No. 1, formerly known as Monkwearmouth Mine, closed in 1932. Seam No. 2, originally Holmes Tunnel, in 1945, when conditions were changed dramatically and the nation was struggling through a depression and world war. Looking back, problems occurred in both the West Wallsend Colliery and the Monkwearmouth Colliery quite early in their operation. The beginning of the labour history in West Wallsend appears to have started in the mine's first year of operation. The owners of the new West Wallsend Colliery were associated with those of other coal mines who were attempting to break an 1872 agreement that linked the payment of miners to a sliding scale based on the price of coal. The result was that just as the new West Wallsend mine was opened, a strike commenced in September 1888. The friction between miners and management over pay and conditions led to this strike action, and scab labour was brought in from Sydney. The company thought to solve it by hiring 80 labourers in Sydney to work the mine. Just 23 of the 80 men actually arrived by a special train. The 23 were protected by a police magistrate, a police inspector, 30 policemen, and an army lieutenant with a contingent of 50 redcoat artillery from Sydney to support the Newcastle force, complete with a machine gun. Perhaps on reflection, this could be considered overkill. The company built a row of huts along the north side of Wilson Street, which was known locally as Scab Row, to house the scab or blackleg labour. These huts were soon demolished after the miners went back to work some months later, apparently on their own conditions. Although disturbances occurred in some of the mines, there was no real trouble at West Wallsend, as many of the blacklegs who had been signed up on false pretences left without doing any work. That the miners and associated workers could continue a strike for any period was due in part to what was called a district commissary committee, which kept in touch with any cases of distress and assisted through what must have been a well-maintained fund. The commissary committee was elected by the various miners' lodges and not only provided cash to those in need, but collected and distributed goods in kind. Despite this history, relatively little is now known of the activities of the lodges in the life of the communities. The May Day marches in the 1920s were also subsidised by the miners' lodges. Again, in 1925-26, a lamp strike was held as the men wanted to use safer lamps and refused kerosene lamps after a lamp cabin had caught fire and destroyed all their own lamps. The infamous Rothbury riot occurred in 1929, and no doubt miners from West Wallsend were involved in what began as a protest against the use of non-union labour and ended up in a death. Later in 1935, some 600 men, led by the brass band, marched 8 miles or about 12 kilometres from West Wallsend to Spears Point to protest to the Lake Macquarie Shire Council about their relief work conditions. Life was very hard. Back in the 1890s, the Great Depression had forced both mines into financial difficulties. Monkwearmouth had gone into voluntary liquidation in February 1892, only a couple of years after beginning operations, and was taken over by the bank. It was renamed CM Colliery on the 17th of June 1892 and reopened. West Wallsend also entered into an agreement with Dr. Robertson on the 9th of March 1894. An extraordinary meeting was held on the 20th of April, and the companies were to be wound up and liquidators authorised to carry out a complete sale of each company. An interesting solution was provided by Dr. Robertson and a small group of men. As a result of Robertson's intervention, both mines continued to operate until they were taken over by the newly formed Caledonian Coal Company in 1895. The arrival of the Caledonian Coal Company in 1895 and its influence on the growth of West Wallsend Coal Company cannot be overlooked or understated in the development of the town, although there's some indication in news articles that this company may have been quietly in operation before this official date. Following the troubled times leading up to 1895, the Caledonian Coal Company then took over West Wallsend No. 1 colliery, and before long the output and workforce had doubled. The Caledonian Company was created in Glasgow, Scotland, by wealthy industrialists who wanted to capitalise on the new mines being opened up in New South Wales. This company took over the majority of the mines in the district. Under the leadership of Dr. Robertson, the future of the coal industry looked promising. It's probably important to note at this point that there were 2 men sharing the name Robertson who were both very well-known public figures in New South Wales and of importance to the development of coal mining in the shadow of Mount Sugarloaf. Sir John Robertson was a reformer and politician born on the 15th of October 1816 at Bow, London. After his arrival in Australia, he became a great advocate for land reform. In 1835, Robertson joined his father on the land near Jerry's Plains on the Hunter River and gradually acquired much country experience as a station manager and minor explorer of the Northwest. He traversed the Liverpool Plains to the Namoy River and down the Darling to the site of the future town of Burke. He responded to the harsh demands of the bush and became a squatter. Robertson entered politics in the 1850s and became Premier in March 1860. He completed the drafting of legislation to put into effect his land reforms, the Crown Lands Alienation Bill and the Crown Lands Act, also known as Robertson's Land Acts, which allowed European settlers to legally purchase and occupy Crown land before survey. The aim of these acts was to break the monopoly of squatters and pastoralists of the early 19th century New South Wales colony. These bills were passed in October 1861, but not without much political manoeuvring. Throughout his career, Robertson suffered periodic financial difficulties, and in 1870 he was declared bankrupt. He resigned his seat, which he regained the same year after money was raised for the benefit of his family. He was 5 times Premier of the state. He died in 1891. Dr. James Robert Miller Robertson, mining engineer, coal miner, medical practitioner, was born in 1844 in Scotland, the son of James Robertson, surgeon, colliery owner and town provost, and his wife Joanna. In January 1874, he visited New South Wales and in July 1880 settled in Sydney as a mining and consulting engineer. There is little evidence that he practiced as a medical practitioner. He spent the next 50 years closely involved in the New South Wales coal industry and as geological consultant to mining operations elsewhere in Australia. His interests covered vast tracts of Australia. He was deeply involved in the coal industry in the Newcastle area. Robertson was president of several royal commissions into accidents, including those at Lithgow, Tighes Hill and Delta Collieries, into the condition of Ferndale Pit in 1886, and into the Bulli Colliery explosion in 1887. By 1896, he was Managing Director of the Caledonian Coal Company, Director of the Mount Kembla Coal and Oil Company, the North Coast Steam Navigation Company, and other colliery and shipping firms. An uncompromising employer, he was in frequent conflict with his miners, particularly during the coal strike of 1891. He was a tall, heavily built man and reserved, but a powerful force in the mining industry of the time. Robertson died in his Kirribilli home on the 11th of April, 1932. Let us return to our interest in the mines in the shadow of Mount Sugarloaf. We know that the West Wallsend Coal Company had already begun exploratory digging in mid-1885, and as soon as agreement was signed, the company had a town surveyed and land ready for sale close to the mine head by 1886. West Wallsend Township was based on a subdivision plan prepared by West Wallsend Coal Company to develop a town to house the workers it knew would need to obtain what it described as a practically inexhaustible supply of proved coal. Both West Wallsend and Holmesville are the result of planned subdivisions, the one from coal company land and the other from the private land of Joseph Holmes. In each case, the lots were bought largely by mine workers' families who were then contracted to erect a house on the lot. The first subdivision of town blocks released by the mining company was registered on the 17th of June 1886. The lots were quarter-acre blocks on streets mainly named after directors and others associated with the company. These street names include Withers, Wilson, Brown and Brooks. However, Renwick Street was named after a Depression-era doctor whom the community respected for his work and care during this difficult time. At an auction held on the 12th of August 1887, many blocks were sold, and Carrington Street, originally referred to as Minmi Road, was to become the main street of town. Carrington Street was named after Charles Carrington, Governor of New South Wales, between 1885 and 1890. The official opening of West Wallsend No. 1 Colliery had been held on the 4th of July 1888, when miners were searching for land on which to build their homes near the mine. This date also marked the introduction of the passenger service of the new rail line from Cockle Creek to West Wallsend, so people were able to reach West Wallsend by train. Another land sale was held on the 23rd of July 1888, only a few days after the opening of the mine. It was reported that 116 to 120 lots out of the 200 were disposed of, and with one or two exceptions, to single lot buyers. A second extended subdivision was registered on the 16th of August 1888, another subdivision in 1889, and a third subdivision declared in 1901 were all reported in the Newcastle Morning Herald and Miners Advocate, which had written that the blocks were knocked down for £50. The town of West Wallsend, by 1908, just 20 years after the opening of that first mine, included a thriving cooperative society, a strong football club known as the Bluebells Soccer Club, a cemetery, several satellite communities including O'Donnelltown, Ladysmith and Holmesville, churches, a school of arts, a Masonic institute, a grand post office, a railway station, electricity, and a reticulated water supply from the Hunter system, and at least 5 hotels. In 1910, the steam tram linked Wallsend and West Wallsend, and the town had about 6,000 inhabitants. The community of West Wallsend was thriving. In summary then, the West Wallsend Coal Company was formed in Sydney in the year 1885 with a capital of £90,000 in 90,000 shares at £1 each. They had secured 2,972 acres of freehold land, which was hilly and thickly studded with timber. It was bounded on the east by the estates of Messrs. J&A Brown, the Newcastle Wallsend Coal Company, and Young Wallsend Colliery. On the south by Terralba Colliery, and on the north and west by the Monkwearmouth Coal Company, where Mr. Samuel Barr was the manager of the colliery, and Dr. Robertson was the consulting engineer. In conclusion, let me make this summary of the collieries that were attempted between 1875 and 1890 in this area. Overall, there were at least 8 attempts at establishing new collieries during this period. However, only 4 ever operated in a successful manner. These were Monkwearmouth Coal Company, later known as CM No. 1, West Wallsend Coal Company, Killingworth Coal Company, and Seam No. 2, all of which were taken over by the Caledonian Coal Company in 1895. After the West Wallsend colliery closure in 1923, the 1929 lockout, and the beginning of the Great Depression in the 1930s, the population of West Wallsend had fallen, and after World War II in 1947, there were only 1,683 persons and 475 homes recorded in West Wallsend. During the Depression years in the 1930s, men working for the dole often did roadworks both locally and on projects away from home. These men built a road up Mount Sugarloaf, as well as the curb and guttering along Withers Street, which was known as the Golden Mile. With its high unemployment, some referred to West Wallsend as West Wallsend. As nearby mines gradually closed, the population continued to shrink until eventually new mines and then the steelworks transformed them into dormitory suburbs for those working in Newcastle, at first with a focus on BHP Steelworks, and after the 1980s in a greater range of jobs. Today, in the 21st century, West Wallsend is again becoming a popular place to live as the cities of Newcastle and Lake Macquarie spread beyond their old boundaries. The establishment of West Wallsend Coal Company and its official opening in 1888 led to the development of the town of West Wallsend. As this has been a podcast full of detail and dates, let us now look forward to the social and economic growth of West Wallsend, nestled in the shadow of Mount Sugarloaf in Series 2. The sounds to be heard in this new world include the steam-driven pit whistles which were used to signal not only working times, but also whether work was needed that day or the next. A long whistle meant there would be pay. A short whistle meant there would be nothing. No more could one walk through the forests and hear the masterful call of the superb lyrebird. Coal had been discovered in the shadow of Mount Sugarloaf.
A big thank you to Benita Parker from the West Wallsend District Heritage Group for writing and presenting this series in the shadow of Mount Sugarloaf. If you'd like to delve deeper into the history of this area, we recommend visiting the Sugar Valley Library Museum in Cameron Park. A quick online search will lead you to their website. Over the past 6 episodes, Benita has taken us through the bold beginnings of West Wallsend, the rise of its coal industry, and the challenges faced by its workers and pioneers. But this is just the start. In our next season, Benita will shift the focus to the social fabric of West Wallsend, exploring how the town grew, thrived, and adapted to the changing tides of economic fortunes and innovation. We hope you'll join us for this exciting new series, and if you haven't already, be sure to follow or subscribe to Newcastle Family History Society podcasts.